Well, happy holiday, everyone. Merry Xmas Eve. Christians get defensive about those greetings, feeling that it's reducing or taking Christ right out of Christmas. But the word holiday comes from holy day. And the X in Xmas is actually an abbreviation for Christ. It's the first letter of Christ in the Greek. Now, that's not to say that people don't use those terms in ways to shade Jesus or ignore him or eliminate him from the conversation at Christmas. But it's just to say those words aren't inherently bad. In fact, I think there are more subtle and yet potent ways that we reduce or ignore or eliminate Christ at Christmas time, or any time for that matter. And I'm not talking about outsiders to the faith. I mean, after all, why do we get frustrated by the darkness that doesn't share the same greetings as we do at Christmas? I'm talking about insiders to the faith, the ways in which we reduce Christ or make him smaller than he actually is or intends to be. Now, when I talk about Jesus being small in our lives, that is ironic on a night like tonight, in which we celebrate God putting on flesh and becoming a small baby. But of course, what makes this story so powerful is that Jesus wasn't just a baby. He was more than a baby. I'm thinking about the ways in which in which we make Jesus little in our lives. Recently, I was reviewing some written prayers of mine over the last couple of years, and it strikes me that perhaps my greatest sin this past year, or any year for that matter, has been making Jesus too little in my life. Oftentimes what goes with that is making myself too big. But I think it's easy enough to do. I think it's easy enough for us to make Jesus small in our lives. I mean, we get those little hints and those little nudges from the Holy Spirit to engage with that person or that need. But often it's just so easy to dismiss it as an overactive conscience or something. Or how about the ways that we create a long to-do list and we nod at Jesus before a meal or before a bedtime? Or what about the difficulties we go through and we supersize doubt and worry and we minimize patient trust? Or how about the ways we hold on to unforgiveness because it's the one thing that we can control, rather than giving him control and forgiving the way that he's forgiven us? Or how about this one? How about when Jesus doesn't show up the way that we expect him to, or speak the way that we want him to, and we end up dismissing him, and we stop praying to him, perhaps for days, weeks, maybe even years? When we do these things, we don't allow Christ to grow up in us, and he just remains small. Of course, this idea of reducing Jesus and making him little in our lives is nothing new. When he first came and in the centuries following his coming, people did the same thing. Some people reduced him to just a prophet, just a created being, not the creator. A great teacher with great words, but certainly not the word of wisdom or the creative word breaking in at the beginning, or especially the word that's still upholding the universe. I mean, some people reduced him to just a martyr, but not a conquering victor over sin and death, and certainly not the purifier of all that we've done wrong. But, even those who elevated Jesus above those views still tended to make him less than who he actually was. I mean, there were those who considered Jesus just an angel, or there were those who believed he was divinity, but his humanity was just an appearance. There were those who never thought he was divine and he was just created, but like a superhuman. And even amongst Orthodox Christianity, for those first centuries, there were people that struggled with how much divinity and how much humanity. Like what percentage? And the Eastern Church tended to emphasize his divinity, and the Western Church tended to emphasize his humanity. I mean, in 451, they held a church council because this is one of the main issues. And they came out with he's fully divine and he's fully human. That's not to say those ideas weren't there before. They were. It's just people struggle with reducing Jesus and not giving him his the full meaning of who he really is. And I say all this to say is that it's fairly easy to reduce Jesus as less than, as smaller than, and to make him little in our lives. And the last thing I want to happen on a night like tonight is that we look at Jesus in that manger and we see baby Jesus, but we just see a baby. Over the next 12 days of Christmas, we want to bring attention to this. We want to highlight this, talk about this, because Jesus is much more than a baby. You know, one of probably the greatest or succinct scriptures as a commentary on all that we've been talking about in this is the opening to the book of Hebrews, or what we think is a sermon. This is a great opening. Let me read these verses. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. Of course, the point of those first 4 verses, that opening to Hebrews, is to say that Jesus is superior. He's superior to everything and everyone. I mean, of all the words that have ever been spoken about God, Jesus is the final word. Jesus is the Son. He's the heir. He is the Creator who was there at the beginning. Jesus is the one who purifies us from our impurity, our sin. Jesus is superior to the angels. If you keep reading, it talks about how the angels worship Jesus. And Jesus is the one who upholds the universe by his word even now. But the one I really want to emphasize tonight is found in verse 3. And that is, Jesus is the exact imprint of God's nature. He bears the imprint of God. He is God. You know, it struck me that we have a built-in illustration of that very thing. I mean, if you take your childhood or toddler picture and compare it to your parents or to your own children, you will likely see a son or a daughter who bears your imprint, or you bearing their imprint. So this week I asked you to submit some of those parent-child lookalikes, and you guys did not disappoint. These pictures are so great and so cute. See if you can guess who is who in these pictures. I love those. Thanks so much for submitting those. Of course, physical features aren't the only things that bear the imprint from a parent to a child. When we say it, they bear your imprint, we're also talking about personality traits and mannerisms. I mean, when we see a child acting like their mom or dad, we say, you are your mommy, you are your daddy. Well, in the same way, Jesus is the Father. And, you know, in these pictures, you could tell some differences between, you know, this feature and that feature, but also probably because you could tell some of the pictures were older than the others, and that's how you could tell the difference. Well, Jesus, there is no difference. He's the exact imprint of God. I like the way the Message says it. It says, the Son perfectly mirrors God and is stamped with God's nature. I like that word stamp translation because I think we understand the word stamp. And I had a stamp in my office. It's got our bridge logo and name on it. I think we get the idea that when you take this stamp and you put it in ink and you stamp something with it, you get the exact impression that is on there. And it's, I guess verse 3 says, it says, Jesus is the radiance of God's glory. I mean, think of like looking at the sun and saying, well, can you tell the difference between the sun or the sun's rays? No, well, as the sun's rays are to the sun, so is Jesus to the Father. I mean, Jesus is the stamp of God. And you all, this is such good news because for all of us who have been confused on what God is like after Jesus is coming, for all those who were confused about what God was like before Jesus is coming, and all we have to do is look at Jesus. Really look at Jesus. I mean, if we want to understand, how far or near God is to human suffering and tragedy, or how he views what we're going through, or that thing that we did, or the grief that we've been experiencing, if we want to know what he thinks about that betrayal that we're going through, or what he's going to do about all these evil people, these thieves and accusers and people who say bad things and harm us and put us down, then what we have to do is study and look at Jesus. I mean, really look at Jesus. I mean, like, if you want to see how near God is, then look at how God came near in this little baby to this lowly couple in this lowly manger. I mean, his first crib was a feeding trough. I mean, look at the way that Jesus wept over his friend Lazarus. Look at how he touched the leper. Look at his reputation of being a glutton and a drunkard. Not because he was one, but because he loved those who were and wanted to hang out with them and draw them out of that life. If you're wondering, what does Jesus think about my money, and does he care the fact that I'm just scraping by, then look at how he seems to view money. I mean, he says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. He holds up the widow who gave all she had, and yet he also shows us this rich ruler who couldn't give up anything that he had to follow Christ. And how about where he could lay his head or his my pillow? Oh wait, he didn't have one, did he? And if he did, he didn't have it very long, and it wasn't very comfortable. If we want to know what God is like, we look at Jesus, because Jesus is the stamp of God. He's much more than a baby. He's much more than a man. He is superior over everyone and everything. He is the Son of God. He's the purifier of sins. And right here tonight, he upholds the universe by his word. So by all means, have a happy holy day. Have a very merry Christmas. And rest easy and rest light. And let a smile break across your face tomorrow, because the one who has come is coming again in power.